Hello and welcome back for another lecture in your World Regional Geography course. This time, let's introduce Russia. So, Russia has a very intense and unique history. Let's begin with just introducing the realm. So, Russia's climate is identified as having long, cold winters with very short summers. Due to this extreme weather, the import of grains is necessary. They have a very short agricultural growing season, and they have had for quite some time. Now, most of the population in Russia live in the European part of the country known as the Western Russian Plain. Both the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union were imperial powers, meaning that the government ruled over large, diverse areas and populations, often ruling over people that did not consider themselves to be Russian to begin with. The environmental issues are a very popular piece in Russia. Everything from polluted waters found from east of the Ural Mountains to the dramatic air pollution post 1991 to even massive oil spills and unregulated mining. Lake Baikal is the largest freshwater lake in the world by volume, but due to the introduction of pollutants as well as overfishing, the water quality is extremely poor. So what I provided here to kind of introduce the realm, in the upper right hand corner we can see an image kind of segregating Russia into regions. We have the Far East, Siberia, the Urals, Northwest, the Central, Volga, and the South. And then down below again I have an image representing, an area representing the topography, which kind of brings us into this next slide. Looking at Russian population density versus relief. So here in this diagram here we can see on the left is the dot density of the population in Russia. We can see that a majority of the population is really concentrated on the western side of the Russian Empire itself. And then if we can notice on the relief map, we can see some tremendous mountain ranges. We can see that there is definitely, again, a correlation dealing with specifically topography, population, and then also if we were to overlay a climate map showing that most of these regions above the 60th parallel are very, very cold, very short summers, very long winters and long nights, you would find that population there is very, very limited. Moving on to our next slide here, let's look at the very brief history of Russia, which again is quite large. The Russian Empire was built by Tsars over the course of a few hundred years. However, the economic and political system was not sustainable, and the vast majority of their population was in severe poverty. Even 100 years after the Industrial Revolution began in Europe, Russia was still stuck in a failing economy based solely on agriculture. The frustration in the realm empowered Vladimir Lenin to embark on his quest of the communist state in 1917. One of the primary goals in this quest was the idea of rapid industrialization, but the inefficiencies in that system persisted, which led to the ultimate fail. To the ultimate fail. That being said, the Soviet Union lasted from 1922 to 1991, which was a very dark time in Russian history. After the death of Lenin, Joseph Stalin took rule, in which many events such as the devastating famine of 1932, where an estimated 8 million people either starved to death or were murdered, as well as the Great Purge in 1936. Many other tragic events occurred in their history up until the end of Stalin's rule in 1953. In fact, the Great Purge had more deaths than all of Hitler's concentration camps combined. The Cold War then lasted from 1945 to 1991, as well as, although not involved directly with military armed conflict with the United States, but it did transform the world into a political chessboard, and each side wanting to block the other from gaining ground. The Soviet Union did collapse in 1991. Western ideals became a priority. After the early 2000s, Russian President Putin successfully strengthened the power of Russia as a central state. Now, during Vladimir Putin's presidency between 2000 and 2008, Russia witnessed a substantial economic growth that inspired foreign investors to pump money into the Russian economy and catapulted Moscow as an investment. In fact, having some of the largest and wealthiest cities in the world, by 2008, Moscow claimed to have more billionaires than any other city in the world. So although we did see that these Central points became rich very quickly because of investments and exports. Unfortunately, the population as a whole still suffers from poverty and extreme social problems. So on the right-hand side here, I've kind of provided an outline of Russia's historical geography. So beginning with the region's early heritage, going back to the Vikings, then transitioning to Genghis Khan, then looking at the feudal states, moving into the Tsarist Russia between 1547 and 1917. Then we look into Bolsheviks' revolution in 1917 to 22, then moving into the former USSR or the Soviet Union from 1922 to 91, and then the most recent being the Russian Republic. And then also within each of those bullets kind of gives you an outline and an idea as to what was experienced then. Continuing with the regions, I kind of mentioned at the beginning, a majority of Russia's population lives within the western core around the capital of Moscow, but the Volga River itself and its tributaries have been, oh my gosh, another spelling error, I'm sorry guys, have been an important network for centuries. It's also known as the longest river in Europe. So the regions can be divided into other areas. We have in the text, it divides it by the core, the eastern frontier, Siberia, the Far East, the southern Russia, and the Transcaucasia, which means all of Caucasia. So this is another political map that I found that kind of broke it into some smaller regions as well. So you can see that here they have Volga and central and northwest kind of separate, the Urals, the Siberia, and then the Far East. But we do have these very unique regions. Again, we know that the population density is really focused on the left side of this map, and as we get farther eastward and upward in latitude, we find that populations do decrease. But again, we also know that as those populations are decreasing, so does the economy, and really the values of poverty begin to increase in those regions. So again, that was a very brief intro to Russia, but let's test some of those concepts. So here's some questions. Question 1, what are the 3 transitions in post-Soviet realm? Question 2, how many time zones does Russia have? Remember, Russia is a massive, massive landscape. Question 3, the world's largest unbroken lowlands are called what? And question 4, what are some of the major reasons for Russian decline? So before I review those answers, don't forget to like the video and subscribe and comment below. So question 1, what are the 3 transitions in post-Soviet realm? We have decolonization, we have democratization, and the economic liberation. Question 2, how many time zones? Or 11 time zones in Russia. Question 3, the world's largest unbroken lowland is called the Western Siberian Plain. And lastly, what are some of the major reasons for Russian decline? Well, that's because of the poor economy, consistently, high abortion rates, alcoholism, and extremely high unemployment still to this day. I hope this was helpful as an overview of Russia. Don't forget to subscribe, and hey, we'll talk soon.